Well, as a matter of fact, Blizzard did get into contact with me about why the 6th thread got deleted. They said it was turning into a petition. To be honest, I don't see that. The thread's real purpose was to keep links to the videos around. But between this communication, the fact that the thread's popularity really tapered off after the 4th thread, and the fact that so many people already know about these videos, I don't plan to make a 7th thread. I have to thank Blizzard for breaking their silence for once. Even if I don't agree with everything they said, getting into contact with me is really more than they had to do. Before I talk about the changes to Retribution, I'd like to point one last thing out about Holy that I forgot to point out before. When I'm soloing as Holy, it's very difficult for me to dish out any kind of damage. In fact, my most damaging ability right now is Holy Shock. Take a look at my combat log. My Judgment criticals are doing about half the damage that my non-critical Holy Shocks do. And if you were paying attention to the video footage that I had here, the footage that I showed right before those combat logs, you'll notice that my Judgment critical, that's right, the critical, did 402 holy damage. And in the screenshot of the combat log, I had 770 damage. It's not that Judgment's damage varies that wildly, it's that in between the time I took that screenshot of my combat log and the time when I shot that video, they nerfed Judgment even further. Right now, it's absolutely pitiful. Other players are seeing this phenomenon too, and while it is pretty rewarding to have 4-digit numbers regularly from Holy Shock, which is now on a 6-second cooldown, the fact that we pretty much don't have anything else is pretty sad. There's loads of different things they could do to beef up Holy's damage. They could easily fold a Judgment damage boosting talent into Enlightened Judgments or something like that. Or they could give Holy Paladins Holy Bolt. I mean, that would be awesome, and only Holy Paladins would be using it at higher levels, since Protection and Retribution builds are generally in melee combat. Then again, Shield of Righteousness might make up for this deficiency, who knows? And now here we are at the changes to Retribution since Part 14 came out. I know what you're all thinking, big fat skull. I think they have over-nerfed it, but to be honest, I think that it might actually be a little bit better than how it was when Part 14 came out. Don't get me wrong, even I think they over-nerfed it, particularly in the Judgments of the Wise area. Don't worry, I'm going to pick it apart. Apparently Blizzard still doesn't know what to do with Vengeance. They've made it clear that they've made up their minds that 15% increased damage for 5 talent points is too much. I have to give them points for coming out and saying that, but nerfing it to 9% doesn't seem quite right either. Personally, I think they should change it to a completely different mechanic altogether, where if you get a critical hit, you increase the damage of your next on-demand damage ability, like say Judgment or Crusader Strike. They could even make it apply to heals as well. I mean, that would make Retribution a lot more versatile. Speaking of Retribution's versatility, take a look at what they did to the Art of War. It's become another one of those synergy talents like Sheath of Light or Touched by the Light. Its primary effect is that it increases the damage of Judgment and Crusader Strike. Its versatile secondary effect is that it gives you an instant cast Flash of Light whenever one of those abilities crits. This kind of turns Retribution Paladins into a melee DPS class that can spot heal. Considering that Paladins are thought of as a warrior class that can heal, that would actually be pretty fitting. If, that is, we had the mana for it. Let's have a look at that Judgment of the Wise that I was talking about before. Originally, when you cast Judgment, you would get 33% of your base mana back. They nerfed that to 15%. To be fair, this is a step up from what it was when Part 14 came out. When that part came out, all Judgments of the Wise got you was a replenishment buff. That being said, considering that Judgment costs 5% of your base mana, you only see 10% of your base mana being replenished when you use it. From what I've read, that's enough to sustain a rotation where you keep Crusader Strike, Judgment, and Divine Storm on tap. But there just plain isn't mana to do anything else. Any of the other neat tricks that Paladins have up their sleeves, like Flash of Light, hand spells, and that kind of thing, there's no mana for it, unless of course you want to sacrifice DPS in favor of that. It's too bad there isn't a way to say, this mana you have to use for those utility abilities, but the rest of it you can use for DPS. Because that way, it would just be natural for Paladins to use their utility abilities as well as their DPS abilities. Before these nerfs, I probably would have said that strength to mana core change wasn't necessary. Now I'm starting to think that it is. I'm guessing, and hoping, that either we get that strength to mana core change, or they rebuff Judgments of the Wise. Another thing which they really ought to do is change Divine Storm back to holy damage. One of several things they tried to do in a previous nerf to Retribution is change it to physical damage. Since those surgical nerfs didn't work anyway, they might as well undo them. They'd wanted Divine Storm to be holy damage in the first place anyway. The catch for holy builds such as myself is what they did with Sheath of Light. They plain and simple moved it deeper in the tree. Now it's at tier 9. Other than that, it's pretty much unchanged, and I can understand why they did this. Picture, if you will, a holy paladin at level 80. He's got Sheath of Light and a whole bunch of holy talents. He's also got spell crit gear coming out his ears. Over half of his heals are crits. That means he gets the heal over time effect of Sheath of Light a lot. So in effect, this 3-point talent has increased his healing per second by 30%. That is pretty much overpowered. Moving Sheath of Light deeper in the tree solves this. It's still a great supplement for Retribution, and it gives Retribution the heal over time effect they've needed. They didn't leave Holy Paladins without a consolation prize, though. They put Sanctified Seals at tier 4, and that increases the crit of all spells and melee attacks by a 3% chance. Not as impressive as Sheath of Light, but still pretty decent. Taking everything into account with Retribution, I think I'm going to actually give it a 4 heart. Most of you are probably thinking right now that is totally unfair, they have nerfed us to the ground, baby! But think about this. Before these massive nerfs, even after the surgical nerfs that they were giving us, it was going to get a 10 heart. Now it's down to a 4. When you consider that Art of War and Judgments of the Wise are better than they were before, I think that this is fitting. I really hate to do this again, but it looks like I'm going to have to push the changes to protection as well as some changes to some of Paladin's baseline abilities into Part 18. Oh well.